All right, here we go. Buckle in and let's take a ride on Diverse Talking Heads podcast. I'm your host, Calvin Gibbs, and we are going to talk about this evening on this episode, should we have term limits? It's a very powerful thought, and I'm sure our powerful panelists have some insight on this and are willing to share their thoughts with us. Tonight we have panelist Amy. Good evening, Amy.
Hi, good evening.
And we have panelist Kaushal. Kaushal, good evening and welcome.
Thanks for having me back.
It's a pleasure to always have you back. And we have panelist Dan. Welcome.
Hello, good to see you all today.
Yes, indeedy. And we have panelist Charlie. Welcome,
Calvin,
Charlie.
always a pleasure to be with you and my fellow panelists.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So let's get right to it. We all know that our country, it seems that it's splitting at the seams, if you will. There's a lot of strife going on. There's a lot of infighting going on, both from the left, the right, the up, the down. And in the middle is the conversation about term limits. Should we be having term limits for those that have been in office, some for decades, and they are a popular name on the ballot, of course, but are they really serving the people at this point? So tonight's episode is, should we have term limits? I'm going to hold my thoughts until after I hear from some of the panelists, but I do have some thoughts on this and I'm a little passionate about it as well. So let's begin. Uh, Panelists, what's your thoughts? Should we have term limits? Let's say we know the president for the president's office. There are term limits. Okay, they can only serve 2 4-year term limits, and that's it. They amended the Constitution to have that in place. But what about the Congress? What about the House? Should we have term limits? Anybody? Dan.
So, I don't think we should have term limits, except in one place. I would like to see judges be have a no longer have a lifetime appointment. Maybe something like 18 years or 12 years, something like that. So one of the things that I think is important in our legislatures are experience. And I think you get a good mix when you have, anywhere from freshmen to people who've been there a while and have some of the institutional knowledge. I believe the problem is not term limits. I believe the problem is gerrymandering, because I feel that is where the real problem is. Because with gerrymandering, our elected officials pick us as opposed to us picking them. I would be concerned about people being thrown out in too short a term, so we would lose that institutional knowledge. And so for me, I would rather the effort be put into getting rid of gerrymandering first, see if that works, and then consider if we still need term limits.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else? Any thoughts, Amy?
I do believe we should have term limits. I also completely agree gerrymandering is a huge problem. And perhaps there would be less of a need for term limits if things weren't quite as gerrymandered as they are, particularly in some states where you have them going to the Supreme Court arguing that it's not fair, the way the voting districts are drawn. I think that says something. But I am a believer. I completely agree that institutional knowledge is huge, especially in something as enormous and complex as running the United States or even running a local city government. Like I think that term limits are kind of fair for everyone. I would be fine if they were long, say something like in the Congress and Senate, maybe it was even a 20 years was the longest amount of time that you could serve, because it takes a lot to get up to speed. It takes a lot to learn that information. The history of dealing with other world powers or simply other political parties. I don't want to have a bunch of freshmen all the time, because then you could very quickly, descend into something that's even more chaotic than it is today. But I do believe that there are career politicians who get very comfortable, who don't necessarily keep acting in the best interests of the people. This isn't really a part of term limits, but I also believe the election cycle of the House is way too short. It's almost you barely get up and running, and then everybody is running for election again. Maybe make it a 3 or a 5 year cycle as opposed to quite as short as it is. But I've thought a lot about this. I used to think that term limits were just artificial, and if somebody was popular enough to continue getting elected, then let it go. But I've since thought I feel like there's more downside to that than there is upside. So I would be a proponent for it.
All right, thank you for sharing. Either Dan or I'm sorry, either Charlie or Kaushal, would you like to chime in on this? Yes, Kaushal.
I used to be against the idea of term limits, thinking that's undemocratic to put term limits. You should let people choose what they want. But then I came to realize that the entire election process goes against democratic principles in the way of gerrymandering, as has been mentioned already, and also campaign financing, which I really think needs to be made illegal. No more private contributions of political campaigns should ever be allowed. And so the problem of uh, people being elected for far more terms than they're useful for, I think is more attributable to those problems. So I think term limits are a possible solution, but not really the way to fix the system. There are other much more uh, effective ways like proportional representation, the transferable vote, and getting rid of money in the campaign system.
Okay. Uh, Charlie, would you like to jump in on this one?
Yes, I would. I thought I was going to be kind of the contrarian on this, but I do not believe in term limits, and so it's I guess 2-2 right now. It's going to be up to you, sir, to give the tying vote. It appears on this. I do appreciate Dan's comment on gerrymandering. He's absolutely right on that. The reason why I don't support term limits, and I'll just mention, I've been a voter for almost 50 years. I've voted in most elections. As some of you know, I've been an election judge for almost 20 years now. And I'm a big believer in democratic processes. And my attitude always about term limits was term limits makes me personally assume that I'm stupid, that I can't, if I vote for somebody, individual again and again and again, that at some point, if that individual for whatever reason cannot do their job anymore, I'm not going to vote for them. I thought a lot about this, and I can't remember all of it, but I'm almost certain I have voted for individuals multiple times because I lived in the same place, and this was true of both parties. I may add, I'd probably done it on both parties at one time or another on various offices, and I did that. And because I was satisfied with what their performance was in the previous term. I also believe that at a certain point on some examples, I decided not to vote for them anymore because of, could be of age. It could be they just felt they weren't doing their job anymore, that sort of thing. and all that sort of thing. So I personally have always liked to keep that right to me to do that. And the way I wanted to continue to do that because I try to be educated about voting. And, hopefully by being educated, yes, it's okay to keep certain individuals in if they're doing a good job. And yes, it's okay to remove them, vote against them, and get them out of office because they're not doing a good job.
Okay, thank you, Charlie.
Yeah, let me mention one other thing. I'm sorry. The one office, of course, that we have is president, which has been limited to 2 terms or 8 years. And of course, that started after Franklin Roosevelt was president. Of course, Roosevelt won 4 terms in office. And then after the war, they changed that rule. Of course, Roosevelt died in office as well. My only thought about Roosevelt is, when he won the 2nd term, the United States was on the fringe of joining World War II. And considering the alternatives that were running against him, I'm personally glad, looking back at history, that Roosevelt was the president, our U.S. president during World War II. That we can, which was a very obviously difficult war, which we can certainly talk about another time, and the job that he did to win that war. So I'm glad that he was in there leading the country during that time.
All right. Thank you for that, Charlie. And I will now give my opinion, and I definitely think that there should be term limits. And I'm going to share with you why I feel that way. I feel that way because it seems that nowadays the people that are voted in are now more of a career politician. Okay. Serving in Congress is no longer an act of service. And that's what it should be, an act of service. Now, Charlie told about how long he's been voting. I've been voting for 46 years straight. Every time I could vote, whether in New York or here or in Pennsylvania, I always use my right to vote. Now, the thing is, you're only going to vote for whoever's on the ticket, right? So if someone that you like is no longer on the ticket, then you're going to vote for whoever's on the ticket that you like. Okay. Members of Congress, by and large, have made their service in the legislature a career. Okay. It's about how much money can you raise. Okay. It's not really about the service anymore. And we see that because we can't get a bipartisanship on anything, basically. Okay. It's got to be always stacked. I'll do this for you, but you got to do this for me. And where's the service in that? Good performance alone isn't always what gives them the best chance of keeping their jobs. Okay. And it should be. Good service should be the requirement for them to keep their jobs. Here in Illinois, for example, the Secretary of State, for I don't know how long he was in office, the previous Secretary of State was in office, and the DMV, for example, one of the biggest things that they run was in shambles. I mean, hours in line for nothing. I mean, it could have been done more effectively in a lot of different ways, and it wasn't. And I felt even among my family members that are from here, they voted for him because they knew his name. They saw his face and they voted for him. Now we have a new Secretary of State, and he's come in and started making changes. And the changes seem to be for the better. So sometimes voting for the same person because, you know, they've been around or their name or they gave you a turkey at Thanksgiving is not the right reason. It's all about service. It's all about making things better for us, the voters, you know. And I'm going to get off my podium right now, and I guess the the tie is broken. I don't know if it's very effective, but it is what it is, guys. It is what it is. So Dan put a question, and thank you. You guys can put questions or comments in the chat. I'll see it and we'll work it in. Dan had a question: should we term limits for leadership within a legislature as opposed to term limits on voting? Should we have term limits for leadership within a legislature as opposed to term limits on voting? That's a very good question. Anybody want to take that one? Well, Dan, what's your thoughts on it?
Okay. Well, the reason I asked the question is, we talk about limiting, you know, terms for, legislature or other offices, and I kind of lean, like Charlie, I feel like my vote's being taken away from me when I don't have that option. And you're right, Calvin, some people stay too long. But I think part of our problem is some leaders stay too long. So look at the minority leader in the Senate right now. He's been there forever, And when he was majority leader, he, now, I believe that there should be some experience, but I think they should be rotating the leadership. Here's an example. Nancy Pelosi was at the top tier of power. She was the House and everything else. And before the election, obviously the House switched over to Republican, but before that happened, she said, it's time for me to step down, and we're going to get a new leadership. And she got a new person to head the party. And she told the other people who were like second, third, fourth in command, you're not going to the top. You have to step down too. You've been doing this as long as I have. And we now have, at least on the Democratic side, a whole new leadership in the House. There's an example of she stood forward, did the right thing, and said, my time is done. It's time to hand it off to the next generation. I think that's really admirable. So perhaps we codify that, something like that, and says, okay, you've been doing this job for a long time. It's time to rotate some other leaders in, because they set the agenda. They decide what comes to a vote, all those kind of things. So that's what while I was listening to the other panelists, I was thinking, maybe the problem is elsewhere. Maybe the problem is the fact that we got the same people with the same tired ideas in control of what can be brought on the legislature floor. It goes back to your comment, Calvin. We had a guy who just sat on it in the city of Chicago. They had a treasurer who never brought in computers. They're still doing stuff on paper there because she was there forever and wouldn't change anything. Those people need to be rotated out.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm looking for a way to kind of get a different look at it and say, let's rotate in those folks without a true term limit on terms. So that's why I threw it out there. So
okay. Well, Dan, you've made some very good points, some of which I have to acknowledge makes a lot of sense to me, but still it's the business of raising money for them at the end of the day. Okay, that's their main focus. It takes a lot of money for them to get elected. Why? Cultural, as he mentioned, I don't understand why. We need to definitely cut the amount of money, the money spent on just congressional. Okay, that's the information I has almost quadrupled in the last 20 years to about $8.7 billion in 2020. And it's not slowing down at all. Okay. So while they're going around raising money, it takes a lot of time to raise that kind of money. They're not doing what we want them to do, which is solve some of these problems, fix some of the stuff that's going wrong. Okay. Also, one second, Cultural. One thing I want to point out is when you talk about, who's giving you donations, okay, who's giving you money, you wash my hand, I wash your hand. So the priorities get a bit misaligned there as well. Cultural, go ahead.
Yeah, responding to that point, Calvin, my understanding is that a great deal of legislature's time is not spent on legislating, but on fundraising.
Mm,
Apparently, they're on the phone even more for even longer than they are in Congress debating and voting. So that's a symptom that campaign finance reform is in serious need of. We really need it, and I want to thank Dan for what he said about Nancy Pelosi. I actually did not know that that is what she had done by stepping down and having the people under her step down as well. I think that's an incredible example of servant leadership, and that's something maybe we as voters need to demand of the people that have served for a long time. If we don't get term limits, we should ask the more experienced politicians, why you again? Why do you want to keep doing this? Are you grooming a successor, and when are you going to turn things over to them? And if you don't have a successor in mind, why not? Are you going to do this until you die? Then what? Are we just going to leave us in a lurch? What exactly is your plan for the future, and why does it have to be you again?
mm, okay.
Calvin, to play the cynic on this is not a new problem, okay? We could go through congressional history 10, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, history from back in that time. There were many politicians who stayed in office a very, very long time, and maybe they didn't go until they died. So this problem is not unique to now. This has always been going on, and it probably will continue as well. I agree with Dan. Again, I applaud what Pelosi did, and got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them, so to speak. And that's what she did, and I think that was a wise move as she was going through advancing age and all that. But this problem is not now; it's always been there,
Yes, it has been, Charlie.
and on both parties as well. Both parties.
I totally agree with you. It's always been there, and it's always been both parties without a doubt. But the world, our country, is more, and I don't want to get the little red E on this episode, but our country is more effed up now than it was during those times. This is coming to a boil. I don't know whether people are taking this seriously, but you throw mental health in there, you throw hatred in there, you throw people's need to make ends meet in there, and it's not going to end well at the rate it's going. And I know they've already always had people in office for a long period of time, but those that's in office now really need to get off their butts and do some stuff. My opinion again, I'm stepping off my podium. Anybody want to add something to that? Hearing none, we'll move on
Well,
to
when you say, that's funny you mentioned it because when you were talking about, oh, this is, things are getting, crazy and all that. You know what the first thing I thought of was
what's that?
January 6th
Mm, mm,
and what happened there, because that was, what I saw what was going on. That was shocking to me. You know
what was more
that they
shocking to
actually, people actually did that, and the
oh
craziness.
that was the first terror as we watched it on the screen, I was like, I can't
Right.
believe this.
Right.
What country am I watching right now? But
Yep.
then, but then to have those elected officials say, "Oh, they were just on a tour. They wasn't try to do anything." When
What,
an
like
hour
Gilligan or what? You know what?
when an hour earlier your butt was running for cover, trying to be safe, and now all of a sudden it's no problem.
Yeah.
See, that's what's wrong. That's what needs
Yeah, that is
that
wrong.
that's what needs to be changed. All of those people with that mindset, for whatever their mindset is, they need to be adjusted. Stepping
So,
off.
so we have a solution. It's in the 14th Amendment.
Oh,
If
okay,
you're
Dan.
part of an insurrection, you are not allowed to run further for office. And we
Mm-hmm.
have never enforced it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, everyone who was involved, you know, should be decided by a court, obviously. But
Have.
I believe that certain individuals are ineligible to run under I think it's Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution that they all swore to uphold.
Mm-hmm. I heard recently, and somebody correct me if you've heard this, and I'm saying it wrong, but there was some legislatures, legislators that was also in on the some of the planning of January 6th. I think I heard this recently. Uh, come on now, come on now. This is whoever was involved or had anything or any knowledge of it is not a person that I want to be in a position to set the rules for my life, you
Well,
know,
and I felt when I saw that, I said, these people are traitors. They are traitors to our nation.
and that's whether they've been in there for one term
Well,
or
whoever it is, yeah.
10 terms. They butts
Yeah.
need to go. So we do agree on that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So let me see what I got next on here. Um, any danger? Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody talked about judges. I think it was Dan. I do agree that judges should be rotated or have a term as well. They do a good job. They do a necessary job. I think a lot of times they do a thankless job, but depending on what side of the table you're on. Uh, but I do believe that judges should be rotated as well. There's a lot of law students out there, lawyers that can be elevated to run for those positions as well. We need to keep our courts as fresh as possible as well.
Well, that
Because
that does happen in some areas. I can only speak for where I live. That judges in some cases are rotated. Some are elected, some are not. I don't understand what the difference is in that. If anybody wants to explain it, go ahead on that. And I agree with you totally on that. So, and sometimes judges go and say they're in one criminal court, and they go to, I don't know, divorce court or whatever. That they move around, because there's different courts, of course, and things
Well,
like that.
on the local level, we actually vote for them, but
Yeah,
and,
some
and
of them.
that's different, and they have a certain term. They can only run for 2 years or 4 years or whatever.
Right.
I was talking about the federal level where they are there for life, which was written at a time when
Right. Well, that's in the Constitution.
when people lived to 41. So um that's I believe that we should change the Constitution to add a term limit for federal judges. I don't know what that number is, and it may be different for different level courts. Maybe you do 18 years for a Supreme Court and 12 for an appellate court or whatever. that could be decided in the future, but I think we need to find a number to do that.
Now, I do agree with that. And I heard Amy say something a little while ago. She mentioned 20 years as a limit. Before this taping, I was thinking, what would that number be? And Amy, I think I could live with 20. I think
No.
20 is a good period of time if you had an initiative that you wanted to have work or
Mhm.
or come to life. I think 2 decades is enough time to make that happen.
It's a
Um,
couple couple
My
presidents did
concern on
as well.
yeah, my
No,
concern of that is what the age of the judge is at the end of the term. The judge could get that position when he or she is 60, say, and then they're 20 years later 80. That would be my only thought on that.
okay, and Amy, since you got cut off, could you say that again?
Yeah.
no, I was actually going to take it back. I do like Dan's idea. I had not thought of term limits for the federally appointed lifetime appointment judges. I actually think that's a great idea. I've always, and this is a little bit of my dad talking, he's a criminal defense attorney, and he has always been against elected judges. I do understand there are reasons for them, but he has always felt like it's just too risky that judge is in somebody's pocket. How did he get the funds to run? And I know it's supposed to get cut off by there being a limit. You can only do it so many times. So even if they are, owned, I'm doing air quotes, by a particular group or corporation, they're only there for so long. You can still do a lot of damage as a judge in a short amount of time. But um, so that's always left a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth, but I'll admit I'm biased there. I do like the idea though of even if it's a lifetime appointment, it not being lifetime anymore, but being a certain amount of time, because it does bring in fresh perspective. It does, laws change, society changes, people changes. I don't know that it makes a lot of sense for folks that are much older than the general population to be deciding things like whether I have control over my own body and stuff like that. So I think that's a great point that Dan brought up. And I just wanted to throw that comment in there, Calvin, since you took us back to it. I think it's a really good idea.
Yeah, and that was the next thing I was going to introduce into this conversation is the Supreme Court. You know, should they be on term limits as well? We see a lot of activity from their area going on, changing things that have been standard in our country for a period of time, not very popular um, changes, by the way, which have led to a lot of people, being hurt, not getting the care they need, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Should the Supreme Court not have a job for life? Amy shaking her head, yes.
They should not.
They should not.
They
Okay,
should.
got you. Got you. Amy saying, yes, they should not. Okay.
One option we haven't talked about the judges is sometimes judges are voted by retention. It's just a yes or no question.
Mm-hmm.
They continue in office, and it's done. I don't know how many years. It's like 5 years, maybe. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
what it is. That's another way it could also be possibly done. Now, the truth of the matter is, not many of them get voted out, but there have been cases where the judge, there's a lot of bad stuff. It came out in the press and that sort of thing, and it finally caught up with the judge, and yes, they were voted out. It doesn't happen very often, though.
Yeah, well, if you're on the ballot, there's a chance of you not
Well,
getting
sure, of course.
voted out. So maybe they shouldn't be on the ballot at all, is what I'm
Well,
saying.
most judges are good, so.
Well, retention, for instance, here is it has to be 60%. And there's, take Cook County, for instance, there's never, ever been anybody removed on retention. So, in a sense, in practice, it becomes a life appointment.
Okay.
So I have difficulty with that system. And I think Amy had a good point. I don't agree with voting judges because we don't really know. I have a cousin who is a municipal judge in Columbus. And, she had to run for office. She's not allowed to raise money. She's not allowed to speak on any issues because she may rule on them at some point. And so, what's the point in running, right? Um, and she happens to be scrupulous about ethics. She will not, somebody sent her a gift card, she sent it back. I mean, she will not accept anything. But she said, I'm running again for my office and I have to go there, but I can't say anything and I can't ask for money. But I need money to run my campaign.
Yeah.
Because they have to vote on me. And she said it's a very difficult place for a judge to be put in.
Yes, indeed. Cultural.
Yeah, I agree. It's pretty awkward for judges to be elected, and I'm not entirely sure why they're elected in some jurisdictions and appointed in others, but I think the reason for electing judges is so that politicians can't appoint their favorite judges that will rule their way. So I think the purpose of election is to have some separation between judges and other politicians. But I agree, it's pretty awkward, and maybe there's a better way of doing this.
Yes, it's got to be a better way, but we're not going to solve that here tonight. We're just pushing the conversation forward. Hopefully, somebody will hear this and they'll discuss it with somebody else, and the conversation will keep going on. We're going to take a little break right here. And when we come back, we will have our round table discussion, which will be led by one of the panelists. And we don't know what the topic is going to be. So please come back to Diverse Talking Heads podcast. And we are back. This is Diverse Talking Heads podcast, and we are going into our next segment of the show of this podcast, which is our round table discussion, and it's going to be led by one of our panelists. Panelist Amy, take it away.
Thank you so much. So I find it hard to live up to Charlie's Disney World from our last one, but I wanted to go in a little bit more of what I hopefully will be a lighter and a little bit more of a fun topic. It is one that I almost feel like could be its own Diverse Talking Heads dedicated episode, but I wanted to hear your thoughts without giving you a chance to do any research or anything ahead of time. But don't worry, you don't think it's too heavy. The topic is the arts in school. And I'm talking specifically about children's school. So think anything from kindergarten up to graduating as a senior in high school. We're not concerned beyond that. Just want to hear your general thoughts, your general reactions. It could be anything. Is there too much of it? Is there not enough of it? Do you have a particularly fond memory about any, music, art class, theater, anything? So arts in school, primary, secondary, high school. Go ahead and sit back and open it up. Would love to hear from you.
I'll go ahead and start on this one. There's always two things, as you know, I've been involved in theater for many years. I was not involved in the arts in high school. I started in college. But the two things I learned in high school were the following. The high school did a production of I Remember Mama, and which is, if you know that play, it's about a Swedish immigrant family. The person who played Mama in the show was the exchange student from Sweden. Of course, had the accent down really well. And I thought that's the first time I ever learned of typecasting. And then the second story I remember is they did a production of The Sound of Music, and I was not involved in it, but I went to see it, and there was the big number at the end of the show where the women are dressed as nuns and they're singing "Climb Every Mountain." And a guy went out, and this was the '70s, I should add. A guy came out and streaked the stage during that song. I don't remember years later anything about this show, but I still remember that guy doing that. And it kind of just taught me a little bit about art, what we remember about art, which is obviously not the highlight of the show. And he got 2 weeks off for that. And I still remember his name. I think he's still around somewhere, but I've never forgotten that. And that's obviously a long time ago.
I love that. That's hysterical. What you remember about art is the thing that kind of jumped out.
Yeah. And it was pretty wild. So everybody was screaming and stuff. But more seriously, the arts have from what I've seen, the arts have become more important in secondary primary schools over the years. Since my time there, and of course I applaud that. That people are doing that. The kids enjoy doing that. Again, from a theater perspective, I think there's a little more too much concentration on musicals. I was a bit more like what I call straight plays, comedies and dramas on that. And I support music. My wife went through school as, did music and band and all that stuff, So I totally support that in general. I don't know if there's a point where there's too much of it, but at least everybody should have some exposure to that, either through doing that activity or at least a basic class in it, music, drama, art, etc.
Great. Thank you. Kaushal, I think you had your hand up, so I would love to hear any of your thoughts.
Every time I think about education, I usually think about what most people talk about, the STEM subjects. But now that you've brought up arts, I realize arts are critical, absolutely critical in the development of young minds. I was involved in music and theater when I was in school, and the memories of those times have really carried me in life. I think they can create wonderful memories and experiences for students. So yeah, you got to add an A in STEM, make it STEAM perhaps.
I've seen that sometimes where they do call it STEAM.
Oh, okay.
There's the A for arts. So I agree. I would have more, not to bump any other subjects out and not to make the school day too long, but I do agree. Anyone else? Dan, any thoughts that you have? Yep.
Arts is life, kids need to be exposed to the arts. They need to, and they have to have a variety, to look at what they like and what they can excel at. Especially early on, I would start off, expose them to dance and music and painting and you name it. All the different kind of arts, poetry, and I think bringing in people from the community that are artists, to interact with them, to see what it's like, to learn from them, to see. When I was a kid, they would take us, I grew up in Cleveland, they would take us to the Cleveland Orchestra as kids. And they would do concerts just for us, and there'd be various schools there. And we were in this magnificent hall, the concert hall, and the conductor would come down and talk with us, and we could, walk up to a cello player and see closely how they worked and all those kind of things, but we were exposed to it. We were exposed to people who loved it and excelled at it. And they did that with, also we went to the Cleveland Playhouse, and so those kind of exposures I think are critical for children, and it is part of the education. It should be a very vital part. And unfortunately, when they start having financial problems, it's usually one of the first things they cut. And I think that is very sad.
I wonder how much it contributes to us I'm generalizing us as a society, seeing arts in general as not vital, because you start in school knowing that, well, we always had gym class, but we stopped painting. Or we never had a theater class because the school just didn't offer that. I love how warmly you talked about that story, Dan. That was I loved seeing you kind of lean into that. Calvin, yes.
Yes, I also agree that we need to reinstate the arts into school, not only grammar school, but middle school, high school as well. It's a way to stimulate your creativity. I, when I was in junior high school, I took a lot of vocal music. I think I took vocal music for like a couple years. I hated it, but it was something
So did I.
something I had to do, and I didn't take it at all in high school. I was more involved with being an engineer, so science, physics, math, all that good stuff. And I didn't realize until I got to college that I hated that all that stuff. And I wanted to be creative. And during that time was when I was going to a lot of on and off Broadway shows in New York. And then I realized one day that I could do that myself. I just had to get my nerves up. I could go and be in a play. And I did, and I got bit by the bug and had a nice career doing that. But not only theater, but there's all, and I often sing some of the songs that I learned in junior high school. I just bust out around here and I sing a song. And my wife like, "What's that?" I'm like, this is something I learned in the seventh grade." you know, but not only that, but painting, creative writing. When you think about, Charlie talked about musicals. Well, I'm not. I like musicals, but I also like original works. So creative writing that can lead to uh, telling a story on stage. That's what I think these kids need, an outlet to tell what they need to say that's going on in their minds. And that's going to happen through investing in the arts. So, yes, I'm all for it. Amy, back to you.
Yes, and just as I see the clock ticking down, just one final thought. I do believe one benefit where places where it's more plentiful leads to more children having an opportunity and decreases the sense of competition. It breaks my heart to see children, this is my only chance. I will never have a chance again to do XYZ because it is so infrequently offered. And to know that not everybody is going to be able to do something that maybe they just want to try. Maybe it's not their thing, but they simply are losing the opportunity to be exposed to it. Because I do believe for the most part, it's undervalued. So I thought I'd have a friendly audience. I didn't expect anyone to come out and say, no, don't teach the kids art, but it was wonderful seeing all of you live through your memories and hearing about it. I really feel like I learned a lot about each of you. So Calvin, thank you so much for the opportunity. I will go ahead and turn it back to you. I am back. I was given the opportunity to real quick tag up and talk about my experience with the arts. So unlike a lot of my fellow panelists, don't play any instruments. Wish I did. We've just talked about it's not too late to remedy that. So maybe sometime I will. I was a theater kid, could do musicals as a youngster, but definitely hit a point where my voice did not catch up to being able to hold my own in a musical. So musicals are fine, but I'm never going to play Fantine, which is really sad, but that's okay. I play her in my head a lot. Loved theater, really wish there was more of it. Didn't have a lot of opportunities in high school, unfortunately, just because our program was so small, but did actually in college major in a theater adjacent degree. It was called performance studies, which was a blend of original performance and ethnography. Got to work with somebody, and I know I said don't talk about college, but I got to work with Mary Zimmerman, who won a Genius Grant the year after she was my professor. So that was pretty cool. So I did learn from a really good teacher. strong proponent of the arts in school. So thank you, Koshal, for making sure I came in and gave my story. That's
Glad
it,
to hear
everyone.
that.
Oh, yes, I slammed something together in Zion. Where I used to live, and we did a couple years of a really, really haphazard kind of Shakespeare in the part, but it was wonderful. It was a wonderful experience, and if I didn't have kids, I'd still be doing it. But
All right. Thank you, Amy. Amy, that was a great round table discussion. Really enjoyed it. And it added a bit of levity to our first segment. So thank you again for that. And that's about all, y'all, for this segment of Diverse Talking Heads podcast. I want to thank our panelists this evening, Dan, Kaushal, Amy, and Charlie. I'm your host, Calvin Gibbs, and it's always imparting that we say we take 2 steps to the rear and get on out of here. Until the next episode of Diverse Talking Heads podcast, exit stage left.